Now that our name tag is pretty much done, I have gone back and made a few mistakes that I've noticed students make over the years. So these are some things to watch for, and there's a reason that we kind of double check some of these things. But it looks very good from here, but the problem is if I went to try to print this right now, it would do some pretty crazy things. So I'll show you what I've done here, and this is kind of what I've noticed from my first couple of years of actually printing these things. So I've actually gone back in, and their name, if you use your cube and kind of rotate it around, you can actually see, even if we spin this completely around here, you can actually see that their name is not actually on the work plane. So what I've typically run into is students that put their name on it, and then without realizing it have clicked that black cone thinking that was the height adjustment or changing some measurement, and then actually just lifted it off. So what the 3D printer will do right here is try to create its own gap, and a lot of times it ends up just being random loads of plastic, looks like hot glue or something. It's just a huge mess. So I always have the students rotate around and zoom in and out and see what this looks like. It's a pretty simple fix from here, because if it's too tall, my cone, if I click on this cone to push it back down, is going to change. Let me close the shape panel here, but my cone will change and I can see a couple things happen. So one, I can see that it has completely pushed back into my name tag, and so I can actually just lift it back up a little bit. So I can make sure that it in fact is just right on top, and I can zoom in pretty close, and from what I can tell it is most definitely touching right there. So that problem is fixed, and that would print just fine. I'll hit my home button here and zoom back in just a little more. So the other thing I typically do is there's always a chance there could be something floating outside of our design. We don't see them from this view, we just don't know that there's anything there. It's pretty easy to get them way out in the middle of nowhere though. So if you do a select all or control or command A, so if I do command control A, you can see that my box now has selected more than just my name tag. So what that tells me is that there is something outside my design, and if I tried to print this on a 3D printer, as far as it knows is that this is part of my design, and whatever is clear over here on the side also is part of my design too. So I'm actually going to back out and keep zooming, and it looks like my box stops over here. Okay, so I'm going to click away in this dead space where there's nothing. Yep, and there's a shape out here. So I can either click it, or if there was a bunch of things out here, all these things just kind of floating off in space over here, the printer would try to print those, or at least it would try to resize my name tag to get those on the plate as well. So I'm going to draw a box around all four of these, and then I can trash can them. I can press the backspace key however we want to do this. So that now gets rid of those shapes that are floating out there in space. And then I'll zoom back in a little bit. I'll do command or control A again, and that most definitely looks now like I have everything taken care of. So that's a couple of things you want to check out for. Make sure that they are not messed up there. The other thing we run into typically is shapes like diamonds. I'm going to lift my work plane up to the top of Nebraska just to show you what this looks like, and I'm going to zoom in. So I've had students try to put shapes like a diamond on, and they typically do fit. Let's resize this to probably 10 by 10. And so my problem with this though is that the point of anchor at the bottom is very, very small. It's probably less than a millimeter, and so these pretty much just break off right away. There's nothing there to actually hold them in place. A lot of times they even break off during printing. So there's a couple ways around that if they are just decidedly going to use this shape. One is you can click it, and using that elevation cone, you can actually push it down a little bit, and it still gives them the diamond shape, but it has a much wider base because the rest of it's kind of tucked inside of the state of Nebraska. So that actually does help a little bit. However, it's pretty tall anyway, and I typically don't let my students go that tall. Depending on their design, they could. The other thing I'll do is, I'm going to go ahead and undo that so you can see this one. A lot of times I'll actually just grab the height tool and shrink it down. So right now we have 10 millimeters tall, and I'll shrink it to 5. Gives me kind of a squattier looking diamond, but I'm still going to have to use this elevation tool to push it in just a little ways, but it does kind of change the shape a little more. Students are really kind of like that when they can be able to pull those off. But again, I usually advise against things like this that stick up very far, just because of given the fact they're going to be on a keychain or a backpack, there's a pretty good chance they're going to get bumped into and just knocked off. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. But this looks like it's pretty good. That's the name tab shape that I want, and I'm going to do Control A just to make sure that that's still the only thing there. So at this point, we would be pretty much ready to print. The students could share their design with me, and I wouldn't have any issue with that either. So the last thing I typically do is I'll grab the work plane tool and come out here and just click a spot in the back where there's nothing, and that resets our work plane down to our original work plane. Back to blue. Students can look around, they can see their shape, they can zoom in pretty close, which is kind of cool to see. But that one is very much done.